Hello and welcome to Future Food with me, your host, Analisa Winther. If you found this podcast, it's probably because you, like me, are passionate about food and you're curious about how we can use food as a vehicle for change to build a better future. This has been the focus of my work for the last few years. I'm an ecosystem developer, and everything I do centers around how we can unlock partnerships and collaborations within the food system. In my consulting practice, I advise corporations and investors who want to invest in the future of food, but may not know where to start or need help figuring out how to best use their capabilities to make a difference and make an impact. I also coach startup founders in the agri-food space, helping them to attract the right investors and develop their leadership capacity. And since I started this show, many of you have also slid into my DMs asking me how I created my career and how you too can transition into a career working on the future of food. So I also run a one-on-one coaching program called Creating Your Career, where I coach individuals, helping them to transition into and build their dream job working on the future of food. The best way to think of me is basically as a matchmaker. I work with individuals and organizations, helping them to connect to the ecosystem and build long-lasting partnerships that lead to good business and even better impact. This means that I get to talk to all kinds of people along the value chain. It's literally my job to do that. And I started this podcast because I realized how siloed our food system is. It's big, it's global, it's complex, and it's deeply interconnected, and yet many parts of the ecosystem never talk to each other. I believe that the future will be built on collaboration. That's the only way we can really create impact at scale on the timeline that we need to make things happen. And I started this show to share the stories of incredible organizations that I was meeting through my work. These organizations are doing amazing work and they have such a clear vision for the future, but they also need your help to make it happen. So in every episode, I ask guests about their vision for the future, what we're missing to get there, and what help or collaborations they're looking for. They even share their contact information, whether they're an executive or a startup CEO, which you can find in the episode transcript linked in the show notes. And the reason that I do this is to democratize access to each other and foster collaboration. So if you love the work that a guest on this show is doing and you want to work with them, you're interested to learn more, my invitation to you is to reach out. That's the whole point of why I'm doing this. The listeners of this podcast have also had such good success doing so. Some have written me sharing that they found jobs, they've switched career paths, they went to get a new university degree, they launched partnerships, and they even landed investments. Who knows what's possible for you? And I know from putting lots of deals together that there is no better way to connect with someone than hearing their story. When we hear someone's story, it plants a seed and it also just brings us deeper into relationship. So this show is all about making it easier for you to make a move and get that first conversation going. The last thing I'll say before we jump into today's episode is that this podcast is listener supported. So if you love the content I create, or if this show has created value for you, maybe giving you a great idea, influencing how you think, even prompting you to get into some form of a new relationship in the space, please consider becoming a subscriber and supporting the show for a few dollars every month. Your membership will give you access to every single guest contact information, episode transcripts, exclusive content, and premium perks. And you can become a subscriber by following the link in the show notes, and you can learn more about working with me on www.analisawinther.com. Now let's go ahead and jump in. Hello and welcome back. Today, we are going to have a very important conversation that I personally don't think is talked about enough. I don't think we talk about this enough on the internet or at conferences or in workshops or behind closed doors. And the topic is ethics. Ethics in new product development, in innovation, in ideation, when we're thinking about what is the future of our food system really going to look like, what are we designing, and how are we making sure that that works for everyone. And I don't just mean everyone on the planet, but also thinking about all of the different life forms that exist on our planet and that are a part of the ecosystem that we're a part of. So, one of the people that I've gotten into the best conversations, debates, and just, yeah, discussions with is Estefania Simon-Sasyk. And she runs Mycelium Gastronomy, which is a consultancy that brings together diverse professionals working on the future of the food system from lots of different angles. Like the diversity in this network is insane. And basically, they consult private and public organizations who are tackling big critical issues around health, sustainability, and regional economic development. And the way that they work is really on leveraging diversity of thought, as well as thinking through those different ethical scenarios to figure out, like, what is the truth and how do we navigate from that place, also knowing that sometimes truth is subjective. You can already hear I'm getting a little bit philosophical, and we're going to go there in this episode, which is awesome. But I want to just stress why I think this is so important and why we really, really, really need to have this conversation more. I have been working with corporate innovation for the last 12 years. I've worked inside in organizations and outside. I've also consulted dozens, if not hundreds, of entrepreneurs, coaching them who are bringing new innovations to market. Same with entrepreneurs within corporations. They're leading strategies, they're creating what's next in the organization, and thereby shaping our world and thinking about what's next in our world. How are we going to live? How are we going to act? How are we going to interact with the food system? And what's interesting within this line of work is that one, you often do find the most innovative ideas on the edges. And there is a lot of magic that happens when you create diversity and perspective, even though the people that are making decisions around what happens in an organization aren't always a diverse group. So the fact that there is even a consultancy that's thinking about, okay, how do we get you exposed to diversity of thought so that we can inform this decision making and we can view it from different angles before we set a strategy that's going to last the next 10 years or invest a lot of money into a certain area that we want to explore further. To that point, Mycelium also takes a very long-term view, meaning they're thinking about not just the ethics of today's day and age, but for generations to come. And how do we zoom out with that lens to really be thinking about how our decisions are going to impact not just the people, but all of the different life forms that are living on our planet and that we're part of and that we're part of the ecosystem of. So we're going to just have a pretty wide ranging conversation today about ethics in new product development, whether you are doing entrepreneurship or entrepreneurship. I think this is a very relevant conversation to listen to that will most definitely get your wheels turning. And I do want to tell you a little bit more about Estefania. She is a Michelin-trained chef, and her passion is really in transformation. She's led kitchens across Asia, South America, and Europe, but then found that her desire to create a bigger impact and really look at food as a vehicle for change was calling her. And it led her into the direction of innovation and new product development and ultimately founding Mycelium Gastronomy. I am a member of this network, so I have been a part of the group and seeing, how do they work? How do they think? And like I said, I'm just constantly inspired. I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly just in awe of the work that people are doing all over our planet to build a better food system. And there is always more to learn. And I think that's probably the most humbling part of this episode is it really will help you to realize how much more we all have to learn and how really being a good listener is so important and engaging with thoughts that are different than your own is important, as well as getting in touch with your why and really figuring out why is it important for me to build this? What is the purpose behind it? And ideally having that come from a place of love and really knowing how is this going to be of service? Just getting to that soul driven purpose. I often talk about soul driven innovation, but with this kind of work, that's how you get there. So without further ado, please go ahead and enjoy this beautiful conversation with Estefania. Hello, Estefania. Welcome to Future Food. I am so excited to have you here. We have been talking about having this conversation, which is so important for such a long time. And I always like to welcome guests by just having you introduce yourself and actually get started with your backstory because you have quite a backstory of how you journeyed into food and then got into consulting work and new product development. So give us the deal. Give us the deal.
Yeah, okay. So, hi, I am Estefania Simon-Sasyk. I was born and raised in Venezuela to immigrant parents from Eastern Europe and Lebanon via Chile. So I feel like I'm very mixed. Um, I was a theater rebel kid, like many, but like in the context of really social and political unrest in my country, as I said, Venezuela. Then this conflict continues to this day, awareness. And, that was fueled by never ending oil money, which still they have. And, mining. So the theme of my youth in my country, regrettably back then and to the day, is one of immigration, right? Like study and leave. So this is a bit of context of where this whole backstory comes from. So when I was young, I felt that urgency of like living, getting a better future for myself. That, as I said, is a theme for my generation and the next one.
Mm.
And I was supposed to study university, and I was in a really boring language program. I already spoke quite a few languages. So it's like, it's going to be in and out. I'm going to get a degree. It's going to be so fast. And that wasn't the case. So my great grandma passed, and I was bored, and all of this pushed me like into seeking refuge in the kitchen. So my mom saw that interest, and she's like, "Well, why don't you go study cooking while you wait for the next uni intake of something that you're maybe more interested in?" And I discovered cooking, and not only cooking like like you cook at your house, but also like the kitchen and the restaurant tribe, and Michel Braga Gargouillou. Look it up if you don't know what it is, and and the heritage and technique behind the foods that we eat every day that make us feel like culturally rooted. So I was like absorbed by it. And I was admitted at school, but I ditched that and I went to Europe to work for a three Michelin star chef. Fast forward, I spent 13 years working professionally cooking in all sorts of restaurants, a lot of them fine dining in Europe, Latin America, and Asia. And then one day I fell off a motorbike, smashed my foot in Indonesia, and I couldn't cook for 3, 4, I don't even remember how many months. And that made me really concerned about like, how do I make a living if I can't rely on my body? And all of this was happening. So I started looking for R&D jobs and finally landed one in the innovation unit of the Basque Culinary Center. So yeah, I was lucky to land in there, but it was like kind of a startup. There was a lot of things just starting. So I got to explore many interests and interesting things like recipe development, both for brands, but like nutritional intervention with patients or foresight, like the future of gastronomy in different European cities. Started a new business line linked to regional development. It was great. But after the pandemic and becoming a mom, I decided I wanted to, march to my own drums and start a mycelium. So that's a bit of the backstory. Since it's a talk about diversity, I thought, bueno, let's give it the full fledged version.
Backstory. I love that.
Yeah.
And I mean, all of us come to the table with diverse experiences. And, I think especially in food, there tends to be a lot of like people from everywhere working in and with food and the mix of cultures. How did all of this then culminate in you starting Mycelium? And what is Mycelium? Why did you see a need for this company?
While I was working with big companies and governments and all this stuff that I talked about, I was like missing very much the practitioners and overall kind of diversity in terms of like who are considered the experts and who are considered the practitioners, where is knowledge coming from. And I am a very mixed background. I have lived in, I don't know, like 10 places, moved a lot, a lot. So I am very aware of like how one truth can be not truth somewhere else, and how important it is to have this kind of different perspectives in terms of like actually creating stuff that is worthwhile, that is new, that is really exciting and impactful. And so this is kind of the flame that ignited Mycelium. So Mycelium is both a community and a consultancy. So this means that it's a horizontal, adaptable organization, and the team is actually all independent experts slash consultants, practitioners that form this community of practice. I like to call the members of Mycelium the hidden gems, the stars behind like some of the most interesting work happening in the fringe of food. So not like your mainstream, I invented molecular gastronomy person that everyone can just Google, but like from an insider's perspective, who are these hidden gems that are actually moving things around, right?
And I think it's good if we establish, so when you say a truth in one place might not be a truth somewhere else, is there an example or can you elaborate on what you mean by that? Because it's really important then for our conversation around ethics and new product development and how we think about the future of food.
There's like a notable example of, I think, FAO in the 70s going to Bali and telling them like how to irrigate rice fields to come up finding out that actually the traditional irrigation system is the most optimized water management system for that landscape. So yes, that knowledge was good, but the other knowledge was more valid and adapted to the thing that needed to be solved, right? To the context. So that's a thing. Then also like managing kitchens from Europe to Asia is just completely different. The systems that make cohesion and run a team in Europe do not work in Asia. You would find yourself alone in the kitchen if you're not soft spoken and really kind of like work the group instead of the individual. And there's so many different nuances, right? There's lived experiences that talk to the fact that context matters.
Context matters. And I just get goosebumps talking about this because I also love it so much and I'm so nerdy about this stuff. And like, one, there's an element of cross cultural communication, but even in what you just said, there's a comfort in diversity of it doesn't have to all be one way. And if you're someone that loves to travel, then you've seen like, or I love the expression, there's a million and one ways to crack an egg. Like everyone does it a little bit differently. We all follow the same principle or have the same notion, but it doesn't mean we execute it exactly the same way. And when we talk about the future, I think this is such an important conversation because there can be like warring fractions within our industry where people are like, this is the right way. No, this is the right way. And it becomes super black and white, as opposed to us all coming together and just saying, like, we need a lot of different solutions. Like, the whole point is you have a stronger ecosystem when you have diversity. You don't want a monoculture. You don't want one thing that's vulnerable. That's going to fall apart. We know that. We've seen that time and time again. So, this is a really good just example that I think everyone can probably think of one in their own life where they were like, oh, my way of doing things maybe isn't the right way to do things here, or it doesn't make sense in this way. And I have to be open to learning something else, to be open to doing something else.
Yeah, I think coming back to that point, it is so important to have a vision or a more robust, fleshed out version of a vision that we call a theory of change, right? So in terms of like gathering a community or creating an ecosystem that is diverse and so on, I think one of the most effective ways of making sense of it all is knowing what do we want to create and how does it
Mm-hmm.
look like? What are the metrics attached to it? So, for example, in the sense of our small community of practice, Mycelium, say, we have to work with both private and public organizations. And these are sometimes conflicting
Interest.
perspectives. Yes, interest for sure, but also like who you want to work with kind of sometimes defines who you are as a professional or as a practitioner. And really, the point is to stay in the conversation and to steer the boat into the direction that we are hoping to achieve, right? So for us, it's like we will work with, big companies, universities, or foundations, governments, as long as this project is driving more ethical consumption, taking into account, cultural and geographical nuances, and this is a big one. So not cookie cutter stuff, as you were saying, and empowering communities, preferably rural communities, but all communities, through the power of gastronomy, to actually like understanding food from a cultural lens and understanding how this food from a cultural lens can actually transform, our living situation, the way we generate value for ourselves, etc. So I think we need more of a vision than a solution, or, because if
Yeah.
we overemphasize the debate on the solution, that's where we get this like black and white debate.
I'm smiling because I'm the queen of vision. I'm like, what's your vision for the future? Let's get into it. What are your values? How do you like to do business? Because that is what really matters. And that is what is going to attract the right people. And that is also, I mean, it's actually manifesting 101. Like if you want to manifest the world you want to see, that's what you need to know and let go of the how, let go of the solution and stick with the vision. However, we are going to talk about the importance of different kinds of solutions. We're going to come back to it, but I just think that's really good. And I'm hooked on the words you just said of the power of gastronomy. What do you see
Mm.
as the power of gastronomy? Why is that a really good place to start?
When I was working, and still am working with development and agencies or governments or even food companies, right? There's these very narrow models of like, what do we understand by food, right? And each faction understands one thing. So, for example, an agricultural program understands inputs and outputs. And then another one understands nutrition. And then another one understands flavor. So I mean, I guess you can have encountered someone that goes, the one truth about food is flavor, or the one truth about food is XYZ. And I just don't want the one truth about anything. I don't believe in it. So the idea is that gastronomy encompasses like all of the experience of food, from like the hardcore value chain to actually how we enjoy it, how we share it, how it has an impact on our health, how it intersects with our education system. So basically understanding gastronomy as like the red thread that makes sense of the food system and the interactions with the broader social systems. If that makes sense.
Oh, it makes so much sense. And it's true that everyone eats. And I think that's a really beautiful way for understanding that food isn't just a commodity. It is an emotional experience. It's a cultural experience. It's a societal experience. It's a political experience. There's a lot of different attachments that come when we talk about food. And even when you look at the big influences that move the world, it's like whoever controls the media, whoever controls our food supply, and whoever controls oil and gas are actually the most powerful people. So this is why I'm also always saying like food is the most powerful vehicle for change we have. One, because we all deal with it. We all have a relationship to it, but also because it's fundamentally human. It's fundamentally natural. It's fundamentally connected to everything because everything is from the earth and everything goes back to the earth. I also think you touched upon this idea that like I don't believe there's only one truth. I believe that there's more than one truth. And yet, I believe you talk about some universal truths. So, can you talk about this idea of what a universal truth is in regards to thinking about new product development and how we figure out where we're going? What are we creating next around the future of food?
We've been working in strategy, specifically in strategic foresight, for 6, 7 years. It seems in that space of the future of, and the future of food specifically, there seems to be less of an exploration and more of an ad positioning thing of, here, I'm selling you my vision of the future, and you buy it, right? So regarding to this, I've seen a lot of people talking about this future that is sustainable. But actually, when you go down to business, it's immediate compliance because of what we know, like the climate catastrophe, all the risks attached to the global supply chains, crop failure, etc. So it's not really foresight. It's not really the future of. It's really putting off a fire that it's already burning our house. So in the spirit of anticipation and actual like innovation, innovative ideas, we launched an initiative in the community of practice in Mycelium to think about ethics as the new frontier or the driving force behind what our visions of the future would look like. No? So past compliance, past risk management, and actually looking at like what's possible out there. So this is kind of the origin of looking into ethics. The way we do this is utilizing a framework called the Intergenerational Fairness Framework. It's been championed by SWAF, the School of International Futures, of which we're a fellow this year. And basically, the way we look at these truths or this ethics is following some steps that are actually quite logical. So the idea is what takes most care of the generation to come, of our future generation, from human to, all the other living beings that are out there. So the way we work to understand undersure fairness or ethics without going into the debate of what's right and what's wrong in a place or another, or what's true or what isn't true, is using a framework called intergenerational fairness. And we like to use it from an interspecies perspective, which means we want to take care of our children. We also need to take care of the living ecosystems around them. First, understand that we all have limited resources as individuals and as organizations. And the point is how, from the resources and us as an organization, can focus and use them in the most cost-effective way. So we would try to pinpoint what are the areas in our company, in our life, that can create the most impact, the most return if we act upon them. Then, my favorite, we take a participatory approach. Basically, get that diversity in the room that we were talking about. And this is crucial because many food companies operate globally. So we need to understand what are the implications and perspectives in the context that companies are operating at and all along the value chain. Then we establish metrics. I said this before when I was talking about the vision. So be sustainable is not a metric. So we need to get, sorry, we need to get specific. Do we want to be net zero? Do we want to get rid of all our packaging? What is exactly the metric that we're looking for in this vision? So we can understand what are the ambitious scenarios of change that we want to achieve. And then understand also what is the implication of carrying out business as usual. And more often than not, the result is catastrophic. So it's a good kind of reckoning exercise of, yes, it seems really hard, but how hard will life get if we do nothing for us, but for future generations? And then we explore consequences in those future scenarios, like to assess the fairness, the care that this product or this initiative is putting into the world for us, but future generations as well. And it would go from clearly good to clearly bad, but running through a spectrum of hard to tell. So it's very qualitative, but I think it gives a good anchoring of what is it that we're doing here besides creating shareholder value. I love to think about that meme. I don't know if you've seen it. I
No.
think it's the New York Times cartoon. They go and in a post-apocalyptic kind of fire, and there's a guy with a suit all wrecked talking to some children saying, but for a small moment in time, we created so much shareholder value. And
That
I
is
find
funny.
it funny, but also horrible. And I think a lot of the people that work in this corporate setting also are haunted by the idea of, is this our legacy? Is this what we have created? Or do we want to push the needle in a different direction? So yeah, intergenerational fairness kind of grounds our work on ethical product development.
Oh my God, that's so good. So, how does this practically translate then to a corporate or a governmental environment? Because, as you just said, the incentive alignment right now looks really different. The way that we're operating, the path dependency we've had is really different. So, when you bring this work into those kinds of organizations, maybe there's an example you can share of how do you change the narrative? How do you change the strategy? How do you get them thinking about innovation differently?
Right. I think once you have this path going, it is a very good proof to go talking to decision makers and have a more nuanced analysis of besides the economic metrics that we all know, these are standard worldwide. Impact metrics are not, environmental metrics are not. So you have a more robust kind of research around to counter some of the economic forecasts, whatever, right? And some of these might start really small initiatives and pilots. This is usually the way it goes. But this was the same for people that came before us, like Marta Echevarria in Ecodecisión. You met her the other day. She was working in ecosystem services 25 years ago. And it was, you start running pilots, you start small, but then the good things kind of catch on because they actually, and we know this, and this is the most frustrating part, it is good for business to do good things. I mean, this is just so wildly researched that it's kind of annoying to always be bringing back the point of it's not profit and purpose, but it's actually aligned and you can actually create excellent business while creating good impact. I mean, with all the nuances and everything people might know, Patagonia or like so many more, right? That are actually creating fantastic outcomes financially, but also in their value chain.
This is the company I would dream to work for if I went back to working for anyone. I'm like, give me that company. Yes. And so much so that I had a dream the other day and I woke up and I felt like it was real, but I felt like we'd made a ton of money, but doing it by leveraging diversity of perspective and then coming upon like that $1 million idea or just that thing where it was like, no one thought of serving these people. No one thought of doing it this way. It was so
That's
simple, but
sure.
like at the same time, mind boggling. And I was like, yes, this feels so good.
I dream of working with Bonduel. Every time I meet with them, which I haven't yet been able to nail down, I say, they go and say, our mission is to make food, like plants, irresistible. I'm like, amazing. I
That sounds
need
so
you.
good.
There is so much knowledge out there that you cannot Google.
Yep.
It seems, since we are all doing all the typing and asking AI to tell us stuff that they also got from the internet, we just believe that the whole world is in the internet. Whoever is receiving some pieces of this information might not be able to make sense out of it if we don't actually put intention into harnessing this collective intelligence that stems from lived experiences. And I love this term. I put the quotes because I like it. So it's like the first-hand involvement or direct experiences and choices of a given person and the knowledge that they gain from it, as opposed to knowledge a given person gains from second-hand or mediated source. So basically the point here is you cannot Google your way out of the huge issues that we're facing right now, not only in the food system, because it's broader than that. We have erosion of governance. I mean, like let's focus on food. But basically, the point is that if we don't get people that have lived experiences that are radically different from the ones that boardrooms, innovation teams have, it's really hard for you to get those radical aha moments that are going to propel us to the next big thing, right?
I have a few threads I want to pick up on that I'm going to riff on. So, one is that I've done a lot of corporate innovation work too. And particularly, I do a lot of work with corporate venture capital arms and with public projects, helping them to figure out where are we investing? Like, where are we placing bets on the future? And I think it's important to understand that when you're a corporate investing or partnering, it's not just about the financial return a lot of times. There is so much value and knowledge gained from the actual relationship and the learning process and just learning about an area and learning about what else is possible, learning about a diverse perspective, learning about how you'd have to change to receive that perspective. There's so much that comes with it. And what I often see is that it's often a little bit of change management and transformation too, because the employees working with those entrepreneurs or innovators or people that work on the edges. And it's commonly said that innovation happens on the edges. And like we know in ecosystems, if you look at a natural ecosystem, the most amount of diversity is between two ecosystems, at the edge of two ecosystems. And that's often where we can find the most interesting, cool ideas, is when we bring those two different lived or learned experiences together and be like, well, what's in the middle of that Venn diagram? So I've seen with my clients enormous amount of value created, not in the financial amount of like money that returned, because that might take 10, 15, 20 years, but also in what do we learn
Right.
by making this relationship and this investment? And how does that also change how we think about innovation? How does that change how we approach work? How does that change all of those things that are intangible, that aren't exactly a metric, and reconciling the two things and how you float between the two things. But I also think what you were saying before about how do we plan for the next 7 generations ahead? This is an indigenous practice where they used to sit in councils and make decisions around the decision I take today. I'm going to be thinking about that from the perspective of 7 generations from now. And let's also incorporate all of the living ecosystem and all the natural beings and all the microorganisms and all the things that are also life, matter, energy. And one of the examples that has always stuck with me and I always use with whoever I'm working with is that of Kevin Kelly, who was the editor in chief of Wired magazine. And he went and lived with the Amish, who are people that are in Pennsylvania and just like they live by their own rules. They've not adopted a lot of new technologies. They're very firm about that. And he was really fascinated by that. Like, wow, here's a part of the earth that like isn't necessarily using iPhones and they don't do the mass adoption. Like, what can we learn from that? And he went and lived with them. And what he realized is that they put values first, which I think is similar to this conversation of ethics. Like, what are the things that are actually important to us around how we want to live? And how do we create tools and technologies and ideas that support us in living more in that way? So instead of valuing how do I make the most money, like I had an Uber driver the other night who was just going off about how am I supposed to be a good parent when I don't have time to be a parent because I have to be working, I have to do this and blah, 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 like all the different things. So there's a clear value there of I want it to put family first. What does it look like to do that and organize my life around that and design my life, design my career? So what the Amish do is they would sit and say, our most important value is family and community and connection and that we have each other. So when we're looking at a new technology, we would have one person try out the iPhone and we would observe what happens to that person when they have access to this technology. How do they start behaving differently? How does it change the dynamics of the group? Like like a slow rollout versus like a mass rollout. And then they'd be like, okay, we did that for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Like it seems to be helpful. So let's give it to another person. Let's give it to Joyce as well. And then they would see what does it do, but at any point they'd make a decision of is this increasing our value of community? Is this bringing us closer together? Is this deepening our connection or is it actually causing us to pull further apart? And when you take that perspective in innovation and solution development, it really changes the conversation because you're going back to what matters. And I kind of went off on this the other day on Instagram where I was like, hot take, a lot of people I meet seem to be developing things for themselves. And I have to check them on this when we go back to the vision and the values and the why. What is the purpose? What is the service back purpose for why you're doing what you're doing? Is it to say that you invented so and so? Is it to say that you want to make a lot of money? Like, what is the actual reason you're doing the thing? And if you can't answer that, we got an issue because we got bigger fish to fry and there's got to be a reason and a purpose for the why behind the creation. The last thing I'll add is that I think because we were talking before about the difference of the ethics and the vision and the values or the solution is I was at a dinner with a bunch of food entrepreneurs the other night and one of them was like, yeah, you got to be wary of the tech virus. I've been working in food for the last 15 years doing new product development. And I get so frustrated when like someone new comes into the field and they're like, I have this one silver bullet idea that's going to save us all. And we're not going to have to change anything to fix climate change. Like we just need this one technology. Let's invest everything in that technology and make it go. And we will learn a lot by investing. Again, going back to we learn a lot, we get a lot by investing in things and what we learn from it. But he was like, that's the tech virus that somebody comes in and they're just like, first, technology is going to save us, technology is going to fix it all, but also having the audacity to think that I can fix it. You haven't seen me do it yet. Just let me try. And then I'm going to have the solution. But it's like people have been doing this for a long time. Like this is not necessarily completely unique that you can solve it. And a lot of people enter food and then leave it very fast because it's very human. It's not just pure tech or software. You can't really bulldoze your way in. Like it is a slower process and you have to have patience to be in this space and be innovating in this space and thinking on a bigger perspective around what's it going to take.
I think there's got to be a little bit of perspective when we as consumers buy into people with a lot of power saying this is disruptive. That doesn't mean that everyone that is in the food industry is thinking like that, but also companies are an entity of themselves, right? And this cognitive dissonance is sometimes something that we need to navigate. And it's sometimes what actually draws away people that want to create something and disrupt everything in 1 year, right? Because yes, these are companies of millions of employees already. It's not some random thing that you enter some software and you've done it, right? When big companies or big interests, dominating governments, for example, are talking about disruption, I think we have to be extremely critical about what this word means in this regard.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes what they're selling is not a trend scenario, is not a well-being scenario. Sometimes we're getting sold a continuation scenario where the profits continue being exactly the same. And we're seeing this with a lot of the food prices. There are food supply chain disruptions but there is also these pricing strategies that account for an elasticity in the total void. And we don't operate in the total void. We're the opposite of that in food. We operate in the total interconnectedness. So to continue having those margins while creating the silver bullet is just impossible, while taking care of everyone in an intergenerational fair approach. But the good news is that there's a lot of agents of change everywhere in the food system. There's a need both for radical change, and this comes from activists, but also for, progressive change. And this comes from a lot of us, the practitioners that both make a living and have a vision, but can also endure the marathon of creating a change from within businesses, from within policy, from within consumer perspectives, etc. This is to say that I do have a lot of faith that we can put our heads together and harness the collective intelligence of our lived experiences to challenge the status quo, which, as I said before, is not looking hot at all, and create the food systems and the broader lifestyles that we know we must create and that we want to live by.
Amen. I agree. But even that, recognizing everyone has a role to play and all of it's valuable, like everyone's influence can be valuable. Just talking a little bit more about how we host diverse conversations and how, because even that in today's day and age, many people I think feel it's difficult. And there's even some fear because of shaming that's happened and like having to be inclusive. So how do you actually facilitate that you bring all these people around a table? I've also been in those rooms with you where there are hot takes. Like people see things really differently, but everyone brings a grain of truth to the table and there's something to be learned from everyone's perspective. So can you maybe talk a little bit about that? How we give credit where credit is due? Because the other thing that can happen in this space, and we've both seen it, is a bit of cultural appropriation. Not a bit, actually a lot, where people will claim ideas that aren't their own as their own or claim really old ideas as new. So I think we should talk one about how we actually facilitate diversity in the work we do, and then also how we give credit where credit is due so that we know it didn't just come from one source or one person, and realizing that many times it's part of a collective.
Yes, that's really the core and the heart of mycelium, actually making that theory happen on a work project based everyday kind of basis, right? So we do this by curating very carefully the selection, like the people that's gonna be in the room. Are you interested in hearing something from, an indigenous leader in the Amazon? Are you interested in hearing something from the people that work in bean to bar chocolate, parallel to Big Mass Cocoa Chocolate that you are the biggest client of? Are you interested in that perspective? More often than not, the answer is yes. So I think already we have the luck to create a safe space for everyone. So there's a lot of briefing on both sides, right? To say, Mira, I believe that if you come here 1 hour, compensated always, if you come an hour to talk to this person, we might, push the needle a bit in the right direction. I am not selling radical change. I think I am very clear in how this is framed. I am selling step-by-step change, right? Progressive. And more often than not, people want to be part of the conversation, specifically people that are the activists, that know that everything matters, that shifting any perspective matters. And also creating these public-private alliances, these citizen corporate safe spaces is so important. It does take a lot of time, and it takes a lot of what you were saying before, relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to come out of the blue on LinkedIn and be like, hey, do you want to come here to talk to my client? I mean, I might do that, but it's always from the basis of radical candor, radical transparency. I am going to tell you about how my finances are looking if you ask. I mean, because if we don't trust each other, it's impossible to actually harness this collective intelligence to create change. And I want to emphasize this because it is important where the ideas come from and credit where credit is due, but it's also super important that we understand the urgency of the moment we're living in. It is important that we create spaces where we can feel safe to build together. It is important that we start harnessing knowledge beyond ChatGPT and Google, because not every human knowledge, and especially in food, the oldest practice of all time is in Google or in the internet or in English. Another very important point. We sometimes spend a lot of money in translation because we might need someone that, is an expert but only speaks in Urdu to talk. So how do you actually invest in this? This is the nitty-gritty of mycelium, actually. Putting your money where your mouth is. So not prioritizing English, not prioritizing a certain kind of knowledge and background, but prioritizing the goal and the vision.
I think that's a very strong point because so much of business is done in English and there's so much to be learned in other languages, other perspectives. And in my early days, I studied linguistics and I studied neuroscience. I never share this, but there is so much that
Amazing.
even goes how into language shapes thought and how speaking different languages can change how you think. So even in that, yeah, there's a lot of value. There's a lot of value and choosing to see things differently and approach it from a different perspective and how that'll change how you feel and how you think.
I guess a role here as kind of like culture knowledge brokers, which is one of like our core value propositions, is go and be like, okay, I have all the patience in the world for your shyness that is actually not trying to steer the pot because you come from certain culture that does this way. So it's not only language, it's not only background, but also how you convey what you know and how do you make sense out of it. How do you find the cultural key that is appropriate to actually extract the knowledge that is there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And afterwards, how do you not take the credit because you only translated? It's very common in every field of study, but actually be like, oh, what this expert is saying very plainly because of whatever is actually this and has this implication, and bring it back to the source. It is already huge and important to be in a room and stop this play of gatekeeping and lofty conversations and get to what do we want to get out of here, how can we actually build something together.
Mm. I want to dial in on that because there have been quite, like you said, in every industry, there's been a history of stealing other people's ideas and taking credit for things that are not necessarily yours. So when we think of this, when we meld, when we really create a melting pot for innovation and bring lots of perspectives to the table, I think this conversation around giving credit where credit is due is really, really important. And we were speaking about this previously, but it makes me think of all the conversations we're currently having about ChatGPT or generative AI, which a lot of people see as plagiarism and copyright infringement of
Mm.
stealing other artists' ideas and stealing their art and then using it to create something else. And I know, for example, in the food world, there's been, for example, certain chefs who said, I discovered this new ingredient that's so amazing. And actually, it's something from the Amazon that's indigenous and has been there for thousands of years. And like they went on a vacation and found it. And then they're like, look, it's a form of colonialism. Like it's a form of still
Totally.
going back to the beginning of our conversation that you come in thinking this is the way it needs to be done. I'm going to come in and develop your country, develop this place according to what I know works and what I think is right versus taking time to sense make and understand the place, understand what's there, and like maybe choose to see things differently. So how do you approach
Mm.
this when you're curating this diversity?
It is hard because at the end you're hiring a consultancy to brainstorm solutions, or it's a very many times it's in a very exploratory R&D department that we're in, or maybe in marketing, so it's understanding how to find a cultural fit for a product, etc. But we are not working on the hard metrics part, and we're also not working in the most like make it or break it parts of the business, right? So we also need to bring a price that is high enough, but that people is still, or companies are still willing to pay for. So I cannot say, hey, I won't do this and bring this diversity unless you commit part of your profit to this person that thought of it, because that's also the true for everyone that works in that company. How many ideas have generated profit for not the idea creator. I want to say, yeah, you get compensated by a salary. So there are some economic implications about like how far do we take this idea of cultural appropriation. Crediting, at least internally in the project, where the idea is coming from, that's given. Compensating every hour of work for top dollar is given. It doesn't matter what's the geographical location of the expert, the compensation is the same. Then how these companies are going to profit from it. This is where we are really pushing to get the ethics in new product development, to actually understand, okay, what are we going to do with this knowledge? This can be super positive, but this can also wreck places, right? We know it. We know that food has this scale that can actually like disturb ecosystems and so on. So how are we actually using this knowledge in a way that we're creating care for future generations, right?
I'm thinking of tourism as you're talking to. I mean, this applies to a bunch of industries when you think about development and what's next and how that's going to affect a community and affect the longevity of a place and even infrastructure projects, like you name it. But particularly tourism,
Yes.
we've seen that too, where it's like, okay, suddenly you bring in a 10 more people, you build up things, and then you not only destroy the local ecosystem, but you also destroy culture. So it's kind of going, it goes back to what do we value? What's important? How do we organize ourselves? All of that is so key.
There's a lot of talk, at least around some industries, about some laws that are coming into effect very soon in Europe on the whole traceability of the value chain. So it's finally starting to incorporate what has been very conveniently talked about as externalities. So we might be talking about something that looks a bit of an activist, a bit of like exaggerated, a pot stirrer, but it's actually what policy is going to look like quite soon. So there's all these impacts of climate that many industries have that don't feed us. So I mean, I want to bring that point to the table. But food has a lot of what is called externalities. So basically, let those guys over there pay the bill. Let the climate pay the bill. Like let the poorest pay the bill, right? Policymakers live on boats that thankfully we're all allowed one. And people are getting really upset about these externalities of all industry. We are seeing hydric footprint being part of this bill for value chain traceability. Carbon, of course, the favorite, most measurable one of all, but also employment practices, child labor, so on. So there are some very problematic value chains around the world that are going to start needing to really adjust very fast to be able to keep reaching the European market, which we know is the second biggest market in the world. So to say, it sounds like we are very far from business interest when we're talking about this, but it really isn't. It
Yeah.
really is a 5-10 year framework for now that you cannot overcome overnight.
I think this last point of policy is really important because often policy is the laggard, meaning policy will follow the innovation versus policy will set the environment for what's next in the business. So that has happened in history. And this is a really good example where when that comes into place, that's going to change a lot of things. Like that's going to force people to report differently, think differently, see the footprint of their business differently. And that is, of course, because we live in a globalized system, going to have a huge ripple effect. And this goes back to, I think, when we generally think of innovation, bringing policy with us. I'm a big fan of that too. Like not just steamrolling ahead, but bringing policymakers with you in the conversation, I think is great and adding that diversity of perspective, but also considering nature as a stakeholder in these conversations. You know, do you have all those seats at the table filled when you're thinking about what's next? And are you in dialogue? And I'm not saying you're trying to tell them this idea is really great, but you're listening to their side of the story and getting their feedback. It's a different role to be receiving the like, well, have you thought of this, and this? Or did you consider that? And then testing your idea against it to see where does that lead you then? How does it's like a litmus test. How does it make it stronger? So when you work with policy, I know that's important too. How do you work with policy, either leading innovation, or do you not see that as the way forward, that policy is really part of the leading where we need to go?
It's crucial because it's another touch point for where we can find our individual agency. So we can find individual agency in our choices when we go to the market, supermarket, you name it. But we can also find our agency when talking to our representatives. We're voting when voting is due. So how can we empower ourselves to create the change that we want to see, right? The work we do with policymakers, we don't really talk to, the biggest decision maker. They normally have big teams behind them that are bringing them facts, data, and so on. This is informing political decisions. This is informing policy making. So what we want to do is work with these tactical teams to actually get them the best information possible with the most foresight possible in regards of, like, as we said, right? This is the baseline, this is business as usual, and this is doing something. And how can we make it tangible both for the voters, the citizens, and the decision makers?
So now I'd like to ask you the last 4 questions that everyone gets asked as we wrap up. And the first is, what is your vision for the future of food? Where do you see us in the future?
Well, my vision is, of course, my preferred vision, but I foster a plurality of visions.
Probably healthy.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. But my preferred vision goes around 3 words: the growth, self-reliance, and community.
And what do you think we're missing to get there?
This is a hard one, but I think activism.
More activism or more people?
Yes. Get more involved in our communities, more involved with the issues, more involved with what our local impact looks like. Seems like we all are the best friends of, like, whoever's on SNL when we actually have neighbors with problems. They all eat, we eat. I think it's like a good bridge. Let's have a meal together. Let's play a role in changing our communities. Let's play a role in the growth.
So not activism like going out in the street protesting or
You could
that kind
also
of
do
thing.
that. Sometimes I'm inclined.
But I think it's good. It's a strong point to say, like, you have agency, you can shape what's happening locally. You vote with your, like, really thinking that and not feeling like, oh, it's just in someone else's hands. Like there's nothing I can do, or going back to community.
Either I burn something and scream, or I do nothing. Again, there's a whole bunch of options for you to enact the futures you want to create.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, okay, looking at activism as a spectrum. Got it.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the work Mycelium's doing, what help or collaborations are you looking for? So we have listeners from like 80 plus countries all over the world. What is it, if we were going to send something back to you to say thank you for your time today, what would you love to get?
If you'd love to apply this intergenerational fairness, intergenerational care approach into the initiatives that you are looking into in your organizations, do reach out. In any capacity, let's work together. I mean,
I love it.
hot stirrers. Let's do it.
Yeah, it's good. I want to talk just a little bit more, to be clear on that, about who your ideal client is, because I do think they have to come to the table with a level of open-mindedness to try something different and new, and to be in these conversations and do something differently, even if it's uncomfortable. So could you put a few more words on, like, who you love to work with, who you target to work with? I'm not talking about specific company names, but more the feeling you have in the client relationship and what they bring to the table too when engaging with you and doing this work.
I think it goes back to vision alignment. People either from the food industry, from governments that actually want to help people make better choices towards more ethical consumption, and to empowering communities to harness the power of gastronomy.
Amazing. And what's the best way for someone to get in touch with you?
So we have a brand new website. We're super excited. You go myceliumgastronomy.com, or you can reach me at info@myceliumgastronomy.com. And once we get comfy, you can reach me through WhatsApp, through whatever. So just let's start by there.
And one thing is the client side of people wanting to engage in this kind of work. You mentioned also your community of practitioners. Are you currently open for taking submissions there? If someone's listening and being like, I'd love to be a part of that, what about that side of things?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because once you are having a systems perspective, the practitioners become the clients of some projects, and then we become the clients of practitioners. So it's kind of like not clear cut. But of course, please shoot a message. Would love to meet you. Yes, it's open.
And do you have an application they need to fill out? Is there a certain level of experience? Do they need to kind of clearly pitch themselves regarding their background and what they bring to the table, like what perspective they bring to the table? How should they reach out to you to get that relationship going?
Right. So we normally go on one-on-one talks. It's quite time consuming, but it's really important to establish the basis of what we do. Putting our biases on the table and having a honest as possible vibe check is important, but also understanding what are your credentials. And this doesn't mean corporate credentials. This doesn't mean any formal institutional credentials, but like what are your lived experiences and how do you align with the vision that we're trying to push forward?
I feel moved to add my 2 cents to that as someone in your community, but also because I do a lot of networking and ecosystem development. And in my coaching practice, I teach people how to actually network effectively to open up opportunities and use their network to like get their dream job, to move their business forward. And if you are reaching out to Estefania, please actually state who you are and at least 5 bullet points of the unique perspectives you'd like to share on the future of food that you can add to the network. Because yes, then you can dive into the backstory and the why and the how, and that's valuable, but you need to come with the what is the value you create, especially if you've listened to this whole conversation and understand, like, we want to know what is your diverse perspective? What is it that
So
you're
much
sharing?
imposter syndrome in such brilliant people.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we need to go into that call and be like, no, no, you are amazing. Come
Yeah,
on.
don't be humble. I like when people reach out to me, I'm like, give me the 5 bullet points of why I need to talk to you. Like
Yes,
I
there
get
is
a
a
lot of
time
inbounds.
limitation that is
Yeah.
very hard to balance.
Yeah, yeah.
But
But
yeah,
it's
like
great.
just believe that your lived experiences set you apart. I think that is really important.
And own them, because that's also, I know when you're staffing projects and thinking about who's going to be on this, like you need to know what are people willing to talk about? What are they comfortable on? What perspective are they going to bring to the table? It makes it so much easier to actually get you work. And like I
Yes.
also can then use my network to help you. So exactly what you said. Please do not be humble in these emails. Just be direct and like, here's what I bring to the table. It's going to get you so much farther a lot faster. And if you're interested in
Yeah.
learning more about networking, you can write me an email. I teach about this
Yes.
often.
Writing an email now.
So good. Well, thank you, Estefania. Amazing as always. I'm always inspired talking to you, and I'm always
Oh,
like ready to go change the world right after. So now
it
that's what I
was
will move
lovely
on to with the rest of my
conversation.
day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. All right, that's all for today. What'd you think? If you enjoyed this episode, leave a 5-star review or a comment with your thoughts. You can also send me a message directly on LinkedIn or Instagram. I'm Analisa Winther on both platforms. I also love hearing about your wins and what inspired you about this episode, so please share that with me as well. If you really liked it, consider becoming a subscriber of the show. Doing so gives thanks to me and also supports the creation of more awesome content like this. You can sign up to become a subscriber using the link down here in the show notes. And if you'd like to learn more about working with me, you can read about my coaching programs and investor services on my website, www.analisawinther.com. Thanks again for listening, and a reminder to hit that subscribe button to be updated about new episodes. I'll see you next time.